Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. I moved to Montana for peace, built a cabin by the lake, surrounded by forest and silence. But peace has enemies, and hers wore a white pantsuit, carried fake maps, and claimed my land was hers. What started as a neighborly spat became an all-out war, and I came to win. I never thought moving to Montana would be anything other than peaceful. After 20 years working as a surveyor and civil engineer, I'd finally cashed out of the corporate grind and bought a 20-acre stretch of land that touched the north edge of a private lake in Lincoln County. Thick timber behind me, water in front, a seasonal creek down the ridge, and no HOA in sight. Just how I liked it. The property had belonged to a logging family decades back, and it still had the faint footprint of an old cabin my grandfather helped build in the 1950s. I decided to resurrect it. Took me 7 months, but I did it. A compact, sturdy 2-story cabin with a wraparound deck, set 30 feet from the tree line and 50 from the water. Every inch of it was mapped, measured, double-checked, professionally and personally. My own GPS gear, my own site plan, all filed with the county and state land offices. If you open the parcel map overlay, my lines lit up crisp and clean. No overlaps, no gray zones. It was as legit as it gets. The last screw went in on a Thursday morning, just before noon. I stood back on the deck with a cup of black coffee, admiring the sun hitting the lake. That sense of completion, real, earned, and rare. But like clockwork, peace has enemies. That enemy showed up the following Wednesday. I was hauling a crate of tools to my truck when I heard a voice sharp enough to split pine bark. "You can't be serious with this thing." I turned toward the ridge near the old trail access and saw her. Late 50s, bleach blonde helmet hair, pressed jeans that hadn't bent since Reagan, and a grimace like she'd stepped in something. In her hand, a manila folder clutched like it contained divine judgment. She didn't bother with introductions. "That cabin," she barked, pointing, "is sitting on my property. You need to pack up whatever this is and get off my land." I blinked. "Excuse me." "You heard me," she snapped. "This whole area down to the creek is part of my parcel. I have a map right here. Bought this land 15 years ago. What you're doing is illegal occupation." I set the crate down slowly. "My name's Nick Barrow. I'm the legal owner of Parcel 46B. Bought it 2 years ago. Surveyed and recorded by both county and state. You're standing on my land, actually." She gave a laugh like gravel hitting a fan blade. "Wrong. I bought my property from Ridgepoint Developments in '09. My deed goes from the access road to the shoreline. That cabin is mine." "You want to step back behind the fence, ma'am? You're trespassing." That sent her off like a Roman candle. She shoved a piece of paper against the fence. Some faded black and white map, no official stamps, just scribbles and highlighter marks. This was drawn by the previous owner, and I have a letter, right here, where he says this slope is reserved for my use. I couldn't help a short laugh. "You're basing a property claim on a letter from someone who no longer owns the land? It's a gentleman's agreement," she shrieked. "And I intend to enforce it." I took a slow breath, stepped closer to the fence, and hit record on my phone. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one time. Leave my property. Your claims are unfounded. I have legal documentation, GPS coordinates, filed land titles, and registered plans." She narrowed her eyes like I'd just insulted her ancestors. "Then you'll be hearing from the county. I'll see to it personally that this cabin is demolished. And I'll sue you for back use of my land. You have 48 hours to vacate." She turned on her heel and stormed off, her folder flapping behind her like the tail of a miserable kite. I stood there a moment longer, taking in what just happened. Welcome to Montana, I guess. It took less than a week for the crazy to find me, but I wasn't rattled. I'd dealt with worse disputes in 10 years of commercial boundary work. I knew what this was, a bluff. Still, a bluff can turn dangerous if you don't stomp it early. So I grabbed my laptop, opened the file directory with all my site plans, GPS logs, and legal documents, and got to work preparing a response she wouldn't soon forget. After she stormed off, I didn't waste a second. I've dealt with land disputes before, and I know the difference between a nuisance and a problem. Karen, she was trying her damnedest to be both. First thing I did was print out a hard copy of my official survey, the one I'd signed off on myself, along with 2 other licensed surveyors. It included GPS overlays, coordinate callouts, and high-resolution satellite imagery. I flagged the corners with red ink and attached a copy of my deed and the county-registered parcel description. Then I typed up a formal letter summarizing my legal ownership, the location of the cabin within the boundaries, and the fact that I'd now received threats of forced removal and legal action from a third party claiming interest in my land. I emailed that bundle directly to the Lincoln County Land Records Office, CC'd the Office of the Assessor, and filed a secondary digital record to the Montana State Department of Natural Resources just to cover all bases. I don't play small when people threaten my property. Then I filed a formal incident report with the county sheriff's office. Not a criminal complaint, just a log of the encounter. I included video footage from my phone, photos of the fence line, and a transcript of her exact words. My goal was simple: create a legal trail before she could distort it. That afternoon, I went into town and hired a third-party independent surveyor, Tim Blanchard, a guy with a spotless reputation and zero ties to me. I wanted neutral verification that my data was accurate and unchallengeable. He agreed to head out the following morning to verify my boundaries using RTK GPS and cross-check my corner markers. I also installed 2 new motion-activated trail cameras, one facing the slope toward Karen's house and the other near the trail she used to access my property. I wasn't taking chances. By Friday morning, Tim had completed his pass and confirmed every inch of my boundaries matched the official record. My cabin stood exactly 26 feet inside my southern lot line, not 1 inch over. His report was clean, stamped, and signed by an outside professional. That same day, I received an email from the county assessor's office. Apparently, they had already had communications from a woman named Karen Godfrey, who claimed there had been encroachment on her property by a freestanding illegal structure. Fortunately, the county didn't just take her word. They'd seen the survey records, saw the title match, and politely suggested she submit any evidence she had in writing or drop the matter. Of course, she didn't drop it. That evening, I found an envelope taped to my mailbox, unmarked, but I recognized the handwriting. Inside was a letter titled "Final Warning Before Legal Action," accompanied by a badly photocopied map with an old coffee stain and a post-it labeled "Private Zone Property Line as per developer notes." It looked like something a third grader would draw in detention. The letter accused me of aggressive and unlawful behavior, hostile boundary expansion, and property intimidation tactics. She demanded that I hand over the keys to the cabin until rightful ownership can be restored, and threatened immediate litigation. She even claimed that I had removed her original boundary markers. An obvious lie, since no such markers existed within her records. I scanned the documents, logged them, and forwarded everything to the sheriff's office and to my land attorney in Missoula. I don't even like lawyers, but I like being blindsided in court even less. The last straw. Saturday morning, I spotted her again, standing just beyond the tree line with a pair of binoculars, watching the cabin, watching me. When she realized I'd seen her, she disappeared back into the woods like a deer with a bad attitude. I filed a no-contact request that same day. Not a restraining order, just a formal notice that further harassment would be treated as unlawful trespass and intimidation. By the end of the week, I had everything documented, submitted, notarized, and logged in triplicate. Karen could scream until her face turned blue, but if she escalated, I'd already built the legal walls 10 feet high. She didn't know who she was messing with, but soon enough, she would. Monday morning rolled in wet and gray, typical for early spring up in the mountains. I had just finished checking the motion-activated cameras, no new Karen sightings, thank God, when I got the call. It was from Caleb Jennings, a senior field officer from the County Land Survey Coordination Unit. Friendly guy. Deep voice, sounded like he lived on black coffee and common sense. "Mr. Barrow," he said, "we received duplicate requests from both you and Ms. Godfrey regarding a potential boundary dispute. Given the escalation, we're dispatching a county surveyor and recorder this week to independently assess the properties. Standard protocol. You'll be notified 24 hours in advance." Perfect. I thanked him and started pulling together my full file. Maps, drone overlays, physical corner stake photos, every correspondence from the past week, printed and tabbed. I'd even flagged original lumber transport records from the 1940s to show how the land was historically platted, just in case. 2 days later, 2 trucks pulled up my drive, a dusty green Ford with the county seal and a silver SUV marked Independent Recorder. Out stepped Caleb and a woman named Marissa Dodd, clipboard in one hand and Leica total station slung over her shoulder. I offered coffee and stepped aside. They didn't need much from me, just access to the southeast quadrant and permission to cross over to the adjacent lot. I warned them Karen might be uninhibited in her behavior, and Caleb chuckled like it wasn't his first rodeo. I watched from a distance while they walked the fence line, marked control points, and pulled GPS coordinates. After a couple of hours, they asked to verify some interior points along the slope between my cabin and Karen's backyard. I walked with them to the boundary line, pointing out the fresh pink flags my surveyor had placed. That's when I saw her. Karen stood barefoot on her deck, wearing a turquoise bathrobe, one hand on her hip, the other clutching a cup of tea like it was her royal scepter. The moment she saw Caleb and Marissa scanning the slope with a laser rangefinder, she charged down her steps. "You can't just come onto my property without a formal notice," she shrieked. "This is an invasion of privacy." "I'll call the sheriff." Caleb calmly held up a laminated permit. "Ms. Godfrey, we're acting under county authority due to a mutual boundary dispute filing. You were notified via mail and email. You also signed the original development documents granting right of access for official inspection." Karen went silent, blinking like a fax machine out of toner. Then she hissed, "Well, I still don't consent." "You don't need to," Marissa said flatly, never looking up from her laser rangefinder. The rest of the inspection proceeded in awkward silence, Karen fuming on the edge of her deck like a suburban gargoyle. Once they were done, Caleb thanked me and said, "We'll have results for both parties within 48 hours. Should be interesting." He wasn't kidding. That Friday, I got a certified envelope hand-delivered by a county courier. Inside was a summary of findings that read like a Christmas miracle. I read it 3 times just to be sure I wasn't hallucinating. 1. My cabin was entirely and cleanly within my recorded boundaries. Not even a gutter crossed the line. Dusra, Karen's house, the one she bought 15 years ago through some fly-by-night bankrupt developer, was encroaching 26 feet into my parcel. Her entire rear deck, exterior shed, and gravel parking spot on my land. Moondrom, the original subdivision plat that Karen referenced, had never been finalized or registered with the county. No legal binding corners, no certified corner posts, and, most critically, no formal deeded overlay, approved post-construction. In other words, her house was built in the wrong place, and it wasn't my cabin invading her world. It was her entire back half living rent-free on mine. I sat there at the kitchen table, just staring at the document, the corners of my mouth twitching. It was absurd. It was beautiful, and it was about to get a whole lot worse for Karen. I didn't even need to make a move. That same evening, I heard it, a high-pitched, glass-shattering scream echoing from her porch. I stepped outside in time to see Karen pacing back and forth with a crumpled envelope in her hand, waving it like a protest flag. Then she spotted me. "You planned this," she screeched, jabbing a finger in the air. "You set me up. You bribed them." I blinked. "You bribed yourself into a house on land you don't own? Don't be smart, Nicholas. You're going to regret this." "I'll fight it." "You already lost, Karen. The ground says so." She turned and slammed her front door hard enough to make a magpie fly out of a nearby pine. I went back inside, poured myself a whiskey, and took a long, satisfied sip. But I knew better than to celebrate too early. Karen wasn't done. I figured she'd go quiet after that. Most people would. You learn your $1,000,000 house is partially squatting on someone else's land. You call a lawyer, maybe cry into a Chardonnay, and hope to settle quietly. Not Karen. Instead, she escalated like it was a military campaign. 3 days after the county report, I got a knock on the door from a delivery driver holding a thick manila envelope. It was a notice of civil litigation filed by none other than Karen Godfrey, claiming that my cabin was a new construction deceitfully located on disputed land, that my survey was forged or misleading, and, my personal favorite, that I was engaged in boundary manipulation with intent to defraud. She had attached what she called new evidence, a set of scanned diagrams marked archival boundary map, with faded typewritten notes and a shaky signature from someone allegedly named Howard G. Fincher, land expert, retired. It looked like it had been printed off the internet and dunked in tea to look old. My reaction wasn't shock. It was awe, the sheer creativity of delusion. She was manufacturing paperwork like she had a Staples in her basement. I passed the whole file to my attorney, Melissa Rudd, a woman with the patience of a nun and the kill instinct of a tiger. She reviewed the documents silently, then looked up and said, "She's dead in the water." But we're not just playing defense. Melissa filed a counterclaim the same day: trespass, defamation, attempted fraud, and interference with property development. We attached the official county findings, my complete survey packet, and sworn statements from my contractors who'd been on site during the build. We even included aerial drone photos from a year ago showing the cabin's foundation long before Karen ever opened her mouth. But the real ace was what I found next. Buried in my files from my grandfather was an old Forest Service aerial photo from the 1970s. It showed the original hunting cabin he'd built with coordinates stamped on the print. It didn't just confirm our family's presence on that land long before Karen's developer rolled into town. It matched exactly with where I'd rebuilt the new cabin. We had history, continuity, and legal boundary evidence going back nearly 50 years. Meanwhile, Karen doubled down. She installed a bright orange sign on the trail near the slope. "Warning, disputed property. Enter at your own risk." Then she posted a rant in the local community Facebook group, accusing me of bullying an older woman and claiming I was trying to steal her home for profit. To her credit, a few people commented with sympathy, until someone, bless their soul, posted a screenshot of the county survey result. Then it got quiet. The next escalation: she tried to file a request for emergency injunction to stop me from modifying or altering the landscape. A judge threw it out the same afternoon. At this point, it was almost cartoonish. But cartoonish can still be dangerous, because then came the mailbox incident. One morning, I walked down to collect mail and found my box smashed flat, post twisted sideways, bolts ripped out of the ground. Not just vandalized, obliterated. I checked the footage on my trail cam and saw it clear as day. A red Jeep Cherokee with a bumper sticker that said, "Real Americans Resist." Guess whose car that is? I sent the footage to the sheriff's department and filed a report. Still no arrest. They said it wasn't conclusive enough, but it was logged, and it was fuel for our countersuit. Then, as if the universe wanted to top it off, I got a letter from the Planning and Zoning Department. Apparently, Karen had filed a formal complaint saying my cabin was built without proper septic clearance and violated view obstruction ordinances. I laughed so hard I spilled my coffee. Because not only did I have clearance, I had photos of the inspector posing in front of the septic trench, giving a thumbs up. Literal evidence. Smiling. Melissa said, "She's throwing cooked spaghetti at the wall. Let's hit back." She drafted a new motion requesting an injunction to stop Karen from filing further nuisance complaints unless reviewed by a court officer. We included timestamps, photos, the smashed mailbox, the signs, the false reports, the whole circus. But what really tipped the scale? Our forensic analyst, yes, Melissa had a guy, confirmed that Karen's new map had fonts and printing artifacts from modern home printer models, and the signature from her so-called land expert, copied from an online real estate listing from 2 years ago. We now had hard evidence of document forgery. It was time to go nuclear. Court day. The hearing was set for 9 a.m. at the Lincoln County Courthouse. Small building, brick-faced, with too few parking spots, and one perpetually angry bailiff who looked like he moonlighted as a bouncer for a biker bar. I arrived with Melissa at 8:15, dressed in what I call my "I don't want to be here, but I'll win anyway" outfit. Dark jeans, boots, pressed shirt, clean shave. Melissa was in full kill mode. Blazer sharp enough to slice glass, hair tied back, binder under one arm like it was a sword. Karen? She arrived in a white pantsuit that screamed Real Housewives of Kalispell and strutted in like she'd already won a defamation settlement. We were in civil court, not criminal, at least not yet, but the stakes felt real. Her original complaint was laughable, accusing me of building on her land, falsifying records, land aggression. But my counterclaim, now that was the main course: trespass, slander, forgery, attempted fraud, destruction of property, harassment. Judge Miller, mid-60s, thick glasses, zero tolerance for nonsense, took his seat and called the matter. Karen's attorney, some scrawny suit with shoe scuffs and an overconfident drawl, made opening statements about long-standing property confusion, misguided boundary assumptions, and how Miss Godfrey is simply trying to reclaim what has always been hers. Melissa stood, calmly laid down 3 thick binders on the desk, and began to peel him apart. "Your Honor, the defendant's claims are not just unfounded, they are demonstrably false. bordering on malicious. My client, Mr. Barrow, has irrefutable documentation filed with the County Survey Office, the State Land Registry, and the Montana Department of Environmental Quality. We will provide those records, video evidence, third-party surveys, drone imagery, and sworn contractor statements. In addition, we intend to demonstrate a deliberate campaign of harassment and deceit carried out by the plaintiff, including forged documents and physical property damage. Judge Miller raised an eyebrow. You have proof of forgery? Melissa smiled without smiling. Yes, Your Honor, it's extensive. We started with the basics: deed, survey, construction permits, inspection logs, drone images. Then came the star of the show, the forensic report on Karen's map, when the analyst explained that the ink patterns, font type, and page margins matched modern home printer templates and that the signature had been digitally lifted from a real estate brochure. The courtroom went pin-drop silent. Karen, sitting next to her attorney, looked like someone had just canceled Christmas. Then we played video footage of her on my property, screaming threats, pointing fingers, and, best of all, claiming I'd stolen her private slope. The judge's expression slowly curdled like old milk. Karen's team tried to pivot. They argued long-term implied use, suggesting that because she'd believed the slope was hers for 15 years, she had a kind of psychological easement. Melissa stood up like she was waiting for this. There is no such thing as a psychological easement in Montana property law. This isn't a feelings-based jurisdiction. Boom. The judge called a break for lunch, but before we recessed, he said, Ms. Godfrey, I strongly advise you to reconsider your position. This court does not take forgery lightly. After the break, the court reviewed our evidence of the smashed mailbox, the surveillance footage, the false report to zoning, and the slander Karen had posted online. One by one, the pillars of her defense crumbled. Then came the ruling. Judge Miller declared that the plaintiff's claims were baseless. The land in question belonged solely to me. Per current and historic records, the cabin was legal. Karen's attempts to present fabricated documents were being referred for criminal investigation, but that wasn't all. Pending the outcome of the criminal inquiry, the court issued a preliminary property injunction. I was now the recognized legal holder of the 26-foot strip of land beneath part of Karen's house. Her rear deck, her parking area, even part of her foundation, all of it sat squarely on land she didn't own. The judge gave her 60 days to either 1. Remove all structures from my parcel, or 2. Submit an offer to purchase that portion of land at market rate plus legal penalties. If neither was completed, I had the right to seek full acquisition of the structure by adverse encroachment recovery. Basically, I could file for control of her whole damn house. Karen looked like she'd aged 10 years by the time the gavel hit the bench. I walked out of that courtroom with no smile, no swagger, just the kind of stillness you get when someone fires a final shot and knows it hit. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't the type to surrender. Not yet. 60 days. That was the deadline Judge Miller gave Karen. 2 months to either tear down the parts of her house that trespassed onto my land or come to the table with a serious offer. I expected silence, or maybe a lowball attempt just to stall. What I didn't expect was for Karen to go full scorched earth mode by day 3. It started with noise. Literal noise. Contractors, unlicensed, loud, and clearly paid in cash, showed up early Saturday morning with power tools and a bulldozer. Melissa was staying over that weekend. We stepped out with coffee mugs still in hand and stared at the chaos brewing on the slope behind her house. One of the workers was holding blueprints. I walked up to him and asked who hired them and whether they had permits for demolition on that part of the property. He shrugged and said, "Lady in the White House said we're pulling down the deck and adding a new one. No need for a permit because it's on private land." Private land, my land. I told him calmly that any work done within the flagged area was under court injunction and could constitute criminal trespass. He looked at me blankly, then turned around and yelled, "Hey, Karen, this guy says we can't touch it." Karen came out with a robe over her jeans and a mug of something steaming. Maybe coffee, maybe delusion. She started shouting about how she was exercising her property rights and that the judge only meant I couldn't build something new. I can still replace what's already there. Melissa was already calling the sheriff. The deputies arrived fast. I showed them the court order and the new video footage. They ordered the crew to stop immediately. Karen tried to argue, claimed she had a revised map showing she had rights to the slope again. One deputy glanced at it and said, "Ma'am, this looks like it was printed off Zillow." She went red, then purple. The workers packed up, muttering about not getting paid. That would have been enough for most people, but Karen wasn't most people. 4 days later, I got a call from the county office. Karen had filed an emergency claim to reverse the judge's decision, citing new evidence and accusing me of tampering with boundary markers. She also launched a smear campaign. She started showing up at the local market, the post office, even church parking lots, ranting about how I was stealing homes and using fake documents to bankrupt widows. A couple of neighbors called me just to say she was unraveling in public. One guy even said she'd passed around printed photos of her house, circling the back deck and scribbling "stolen" in red ink. At this point, I wasn't angry. I was fascinated. It was like watching someone try to outrun an avalanche they started. Melissa filed a response to the appeal. Meanwhile, I started digging deeper. I called in an old friend of mine from my surveying days, Tanner Briggs, now a high-level consultant with the Bureau of Land Management. He owed me a favor and I cashed it in. Tanner and I started combing through public records, aerial surveys, even federal timberland maps from before the subdivision was built. What we found wasn't just confirmation, it was a bombshell. Karen's entire parcel had never been fully certified. The development she bought into 15 years ago had only provisional registration due to a court dispute involving water runoff from federal lands, meaning her original deed was conditional pending a final environmental audit that never happened because the developer went bankrupt and dissolved. She didn't just build part of her house on my land. Her entire house might be on unfinalized land, and I own the only properly recorded adjacent plot. That night, I sat on the porch of my cabin, looking out at the lake. The sky was black and endless, and all I could think was, she picked the wrong guy to mess with. The next morning, I drove straight to the Lincoln County Records office with a stack of maps, survey logs, and the contact sheet Tanner and I had built overnight. I didn't want theories. I wanted certified proof. The clerk, a soft-spoken woman named Dana, listened patiently as I walked her through what we found. When I showed her the old environmental notice of pending survey, her eyebrows shot up. "Oh, that subdivision," she muttered. "We've had headaches with it for years. You're telling me she never filed the final certs?" I nodded. Dana stepped away, made a call to her supervisor, and 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from the head of the County Land Records Department. He confirmed it. Karen's deed was legally suspended pending final boundary confirmation, which never happened. The bankruptcy of the original developer left several parcels in legal limbo, hers included. But it got better. Turns out the only continuous properly registered tract adjacent to that dead zone was mine. By Montana law, any unclaimed buffer land between registered properties can be petitioned for annexation by the adjacent legal owner, especially when the other party failed to finalize within state-mandated timelines. I filed the petition that same day. When the notice was delivered to Karen, she came storming down my driveway like she owned the gravel. Melissa was out on the porch, and I heard Karen's voice before I even opened the door. "You son of a... You're trying to take my house. You're a predator. This is my home." I stepped outside calmly. "Karen, you built your house on property that was never finalized, and a portion of it is on mine. That's not my fault. That's your negligence." She threw a packet of papers at me, more of those fake maps and affidavits from her so-called archival expert. Melissa picked one up and laughed. "This is a PowerPoint printout." Karen snapped. She charged at me. Not a metaphor, she actually lunged. I sidestepped and she stumbled on the first step of my porch. Melissa had already hit record on her phone. I told Karen to leave immediately. She refused. I called the sheriff. 15 minutes later, 2 deputies arrived. Karen was still pacing in front of my porch, muttering about lawsuits and conspiracies. When they asked her to leave, she screamed, "This is all part of a land grab. He wants to take my life." They escorted her off the property. I filed a restraining order the next morning. By week's end, I had the confirmation. My petition to annex the adjacent unclaimed buffer, including the land Karen's house sat on, was preliminarily approved pending public notice. The countdown had begun. Karen's retaliation. She filed a harassment lawsuit against me, claimed I was stalking her, sabotaging her utilities, and planting fake documents in the county system. Her lawyer lasted about 5 days before quietly withdrawing the complaint, probably once he read the actual files. But Karen wasn't done. 2 nights later, I caught her On camera, sneaking onto my property with a can of spray paint. She scrawled "thief" across my new deck rail and dumped a bag of garbage by my generator shed. I called the sheriff again, and this time, they charged her with trespassing and vandalism. She was booked and released within hours, but her mugshot made it into the local paper under the header, "Dispute over property turns ugly." The sheriff's office gave me a protective order and assigned patrol checks every other night. Meanwhile, I sent a letter through my attorney. Karen had 30 days to vacate the portion of her house now falling under my ownership or negotiate a purchase. No response. So I did what any reasonable man would do. I filed a lien on the structure and notified the county of my intention to auction the disputed footprint. It was no longer just a property line issue. This was a demolition countdown. The auction date was set for a Thursday morning in the courthouse lobby. It was a quiet affair, barely a dozen people in attendance, most of them attorneys or county clerks. I wore a blue flannel and jeans. Karen showed up in a white pantsuit, like she was walking into a talk show. She brought a man I assumed was her new lawyer, looked like he had just graduated law school, and already regretted his choice of client. I opened the bid at $1. Karen shrieked, "Objection, this is a scam." The clerk didn't even look up. "Objection noted. Auction proceeds." No one else bid. Why would they? The parcel up for auction included only the footprint of the portion of her house that sat on my land, plus a few feet of buffer. The winning bid, $1, was finalized within 10 minutes. I signed the deed transfer paperwork immediately. That afternoon, my lawyer delivered a certified notice to Karen. She had 15 days to either remove the overhanging structure or submit a purchase offer for the entire encroached parcel at fair market value, which, by our estimate, was over $1 million. $150,000. She never responded. On day 16, I posted "no trespassing" private property signs along the new property line, including on the back of her porch. Karen ripped one down in a rage, not realizing I had a motion-triggered camera mounted to the eave above. She was arrested again. This time, she was charged with violation of a court order, destruction of property, and contempt. At the hearing, the judge, same one from before, asked her bluntly, "Ms. Godfrey, do you deny that your house encroaches on Mr. Barrow's legal property?" Karen sputtered something about maps, conspiracies, and deep surveying fraud. The judge interrupted. "Do you have any certified documentation to support your claims?" She didn't. She was fined, slapped with a new injunction barring her from setting foot on my land under threat of jail, and her prior vandalism charge was formally reopened. My lawyer filed a civil suit for damages, defamation, and emotional distress, and by the time we were done, Karen was staring down over $300,000 in penalties and legal costs. The kicker? Her bank refused to extend her mortgage line due to the legal mess. She missed 2 payments. The house went into pre-foreclosure. I watched from my deck one morning as a real estate agent showed the property to a young couple with 2 golden retrievers. Karen stood on the porch shouting at them to get off her land. It wasn't her land anymore. A month later, I bought it at auction for a fraction of its value. I didn't even celebrate, just took a walk through the empty house, looked at the cracked foundation where it crossed into my parcel, and smiled. We demolished it in a week, cleared the land, regraded the slope, planted native grass. Where Karen once screamed about her view, now there's just silence and blue sky. I built a small guest cabin in its place. Just 1 story, cedar panels, a screened-in porch. Melissa's family visited that summer and stayed there for 2 weeks. Said it was the most peaceful place they'd ever been. Before we wrapped construction, I mounted a small bronze plaque to a boulder by the path. "This wasn't your land, Karen. It's mine. All of it." Karen, she skipped the state. Rumor has it she's living with a cousin in Nevada trying to sell some RV she doesn't actually own. I couldn't care less. I own 20 acres of legal, uncontested lakefront Montana wilderness, plus 1 extra courtesy of arrogance and fake maps. And every morning, I drink coffee on my porch, look at the shoreline, and smile.